Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Teens for Business podcast. I'm your host, Jackie.
I'm Cohen.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Ivan.
Today, in part one of this series, we'll be talking about Formula One, also known as F1, their teams, their drivers, and how they make their money. But first, before we get started with that, a quick little segment going back into last week's episode for NFL playoff predictions. If you haven't watched that yet, make sure to go do that. So, how are your predictions going, and what are your reactions to your predictions and the actual results?
Yeah, I think I can start off. I think me and Jack and I had the same predictions, so I don't think it really went that well except for the 49ers. Um, so I think that's why the 49ers will win the Super Bowl.
I'd like to add on to that, like yesterday's game where the Packers and 49ers, like the 49ers were like really walking on a tightrope. Basically, they got a last minute touchdown by Christian McCaffrey that ultimately sent them to the NFC Championship, and that was like, ooh, for all the Niners fans, obviously. But the Packers definitely shocked me with their upset over the Cowboys. At the time it was a blowout, but then I guess they stepped their foot like off the gas pedal because they knew they were gonna win. So that was a bit of a surprise, and I I wasn't too surprised by the Buccaneers beating the what do you call it, Eagles. Uh I did sort of see it coming, but I didn't also expect it to be a blowout. But as I predicted, the Lions and Rams game was a really good game.
Yeah, I think the main thing, the I thought the Niners would have like a super easy path to the Super Bowl, but like that Packers game is just like they I guess it's a reminder that they have to always keep their gas on the pedal, like their pedal on the gas, because other like you never know what happens on like any given weekend. Anything can happen. So yeah, I mean, hopefully next week, whoever the Niners play between the Lions and the Bucks, that's going to be a pretty good game. And yeah, I think we see a Niners Ravens Super Bowl.
I took the Texans over the Ravens, although that was like partly biased because I'm not a big fan of the Ravens, even though I'm like part of Maryland. So that obviously did not work out too well for me, but I'm excited to see the rest of the games, including the Bills and the Chiefs, and just want to see what happens with them. And I do agree with Kywin's pick of Niners and Ravens for the Super Bowl, even though I would prefer it to be some other AFC team. Okay, so getting back into today's actual topic, F1. So a quick introduction, F1 is the highest class of international racing. You guys might have heard of F2, like Formula 2, F3, etc. And then there's also Formula E for electric cars. And then like some of the F1 drivers were previously in other classes as well, and most of them did do pretty well historically there. And there's like a lot of specific terminology, like that's very highly technical regarding these cars and like what F1 really is, but essentially it's just for open wheel single seater formula racing cars. So like whenever you start watching F1, you'll realize like that's the car they kind of drive. But like obviously every car from like each like from Red Bull, from Ferrari, like it's all gonna be different. But like that's like the type of car. So do you guys watch or like keep up with F1 or just know anything about it in general?
Yeah, I actually watch quite a bit of F1. With the exception of this season, it kind of got boring in the end. But uh, like I think the reason why well actually no F1 I think has gone through a lot of changes, and I think a new team is actually joining the roster. I think 2024, and it's been a place of a lot of technological advancements in cars. Um, and it's also a very money based sport. I know you can say like the same to like a lot of American based sports, but I think F1, we're going to talk more about it, but F1 is really money based. Like, even though the drivers' contracts aren't as big as the superstars in like the NFL or the NBA, but like, I personally, I don't think these drivers need the money. I think, it's a very expensive sport, and the drivers come from very rich backgrounds, and it's just a really big money sport, and the cars cost $15 million, and if you like chip a paint, that's like $10,000, and that's but like still I don't think that's a really big problem for the teams, with the exception of like maybe Haas, which is a very small team, and Williams, just small teams without a lot of sponsors. But like the big teams, as Jackie mentioned, Ferrari, Red Bull, those teams they have a lot of money, and so like it's just that the sport is so money based, and I think we'll talk more about how they manage that money.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't know as much about F1 as Ivan and probably Jackie does, but what I do know is that it's like a racing car series that culminates in like a so-called Grand Prix. And like obviously we know that Formula One cars are like designed to be the fastest in the world because they're being used to like compete. And obviously, as just Ivan just mentioned, they're usually sponsored by like companies that like sponsor and pay like a specific racer and part of the team, which may include like the tire changers, like they have to go at rapid speeds, and I think that's pretty amazing. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but the average cost of running an F1 team is around like $225 million, which is a lot and proves that it's very expensive. And some famous names that I know in F1 include Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, which we'll also probably talk about later.
Yeah, I don't really follow F1 that much. All I really know like off the top of my head, I think that like yeah, like Jack mentioned the Grand Prix drivers, I think well you have drivers, you have teams with like two drivers, I'm pretty sure. And you basically compete. You have a qualifying round and then you see who makes it on. There's like pit stops and things like that. You try to change tires. I'm thinking like the movie, like the Cars movies, kind of remind me. But like I don't really follow F1 that much, so I'm interested to kind of learn more about it.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that Ivan was talking about like these players or not players, these drivers being like very like wealthy. One trend that you'll kind of notice is that many of these players have many connections into the F1 world already, or like the racing world already. Like for example, Charles Leclerc, like even as a kid, he was like that was just like his life, like his family, like they were all very involved. Max Verstappen, his girlfriend's dad is such a legend in the F1 world. Um, like they're all just like very interconnected. It's like everyone kind of knows each other from the beginning. Their families are all like relatively, up there. So I think definitely that's just something I wanted to point out as well. Okay, so next question. So F1 racing is a billion-dollar organization, and we know like they make a lot of money. And drivers actually have to pay in order to compete. So for example, Max Verstappen, who is like the 2022, 2023 champion, like has so many other accolades. He drives for Red Bull and he had to pay $1 million just to drive this season. So how do you guys feel about this entrance fee? And of course, like Max Verstappen's is obviously on the higher end because he's been winning all of these um like things. And so how do you guys feel about this entrance fee? Because a lot of other sports, they don't really have this fee. Like, if you want to play, you just play.
Yeah, I think like to the road to get to F1 is actually quite hard, because usually a lot of F1 drivers on the grid start off with karting, but they don't like do like the K1 karts. They do like actual gas karts with gears, and those cost thousands of dollars, and they're usually managed and owned by their parents. So like at the start, if you want to get into racing, it's already going to be very expensive. You're gonna spend at least a couple thousand per year. And as you go through the ranks of, F4, F3, F2, those cars, even though you don't own them anymore, you still have a lot of stake in the team. And your parents are definitely still your financial backbone. And with a couple of exceptions like Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly on the grid, like most of these drivers come from very rich backgrounds. Like Max Verstappen, his dad, Jos Verstappen, was a Formula One driver, and George Russell's father is like, even though it's like quite like kind of middle class, but they're definitely upper end of middle class. Carlos Sainz Jr., his father, Carlos Sainz Sr., is a rally champion, and these people have been within the finance. They're up there in the financial echelons, and they have a lot of connections within the business world. Like Lance Stroll, his dad owns the team he races on, and then Sergio Perez, his dad owns like one of the biggest companies in Mexico. Like these are financially well-off drivers who are in this sport because they are wealthy, and because they are wealthy, these cars they're driving around, they're like several tens of millions of dollars. And they can't have like drivers who are not committed to the game drive around these cars and crashing into the barriers, and then they costing teams millions of dollars. So I think that entry kind of filters out the people who can't really commit. But like in the end, these people are willing to commit, put down millions of dollars, and help out the teams that you join. And then typically when you join from like a F2 team, you're going to have a lot of commitment, because those F1 teams you join into, they usually don't have a lot of sponsors, and you're typically, your family is going to provide that money to that F1 team. So I think F1, as I said before, it's super expensive, and that interest fee, I think, is only sort of that commitment, like you have the financial backbone, but you also have that passion to keep the F1 sport running, which is hundreds of years of legacy, and then typically from the start, it's already rich people. Like the sport started off with rich people racing their cars, so they want to keep that legacy and keep the sport with the monies to keep it running, because obviously it's more expensive now than 100 years ago.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Obviously when we look at that like 1 million, like the charge just to like drive in like a race, we obviously think that could be like expensive, but considering the background of the sport, the legacy of the sport, and how much it really takes to run everything that is related to running a team, it really does make sense. Because obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the cost of running like a team is around like $225 million per team, which is pretty big. And those include not only paying the driver, but also those like sponsorship costs, those media rights, which we'll talk about later. And then when we look at this scale, I think the 1 million entrance fee would seem like more of like a pocket change for like the league and like for the team to like, I guess, like state the commitment. Like sometimes when you think about like some games, you have to pay, some video games, you have to pay something to like take part in it. And I think this is just a similar case here where you have to like pay to just make sure, oh, you're gonna do this, you're gonna commit to this, you're gonna continue your team's legacy or something like that. So I feel like a 1 million entrance fee is like a threshold for like a team to make sure that they will like compete and like maintain their legacy. And it kind of also like prevents teams from, if all of a sudden they just like collapse, it just prevents them from like, I feel like it could prevent them from like losing like a lot of money. And then like also like I'm not sure if this is also something that F1 like as a company, what they pay for are the venues that the car racing like events happen in. So like I think these venues also require like a lot of money to maintain them and like upgrade them to keep them more like tech advanced in like tech with keep them more like aligned with technological advances. So I think this entrance fee could also help like pay for those expenses that are needed to maintain those venues.
Yeah, I think that like when you first think about it, the looking at like $1 million, you have to pay $1 million just to like participate in I guess a sport, if you will. Like that sounds kind of crazy, but I guess when you think about it a little bit deeper, like it's not really $1 million to kind of to play or like drive. It's more like $1 million as in um you're committed for like the entire year, which is like so they and then I think pretty sure everyone can make that back essentially from whatever sponsorships they're doing, the deals they get just from being part of F1. And if you're a good driver, um I'm sure there's so many like companies that want to sponsor you, and they're going to be winnings as well. So like over the course of the year that you are racing, I'm pretty sure that $1 million isn't going to be significant for you. It's just like a show that you're privileged enough to be able to race in this like historic event, and it's just kind of like a commitment. And I agree, like this entrance fee, it may sound crazy, but I feel like it's a pretty respectable amount.
Definitely. I think the point of they'll like be able to make it back, or like it's definitely a worthy investment for them. Like obviously like it's a great sport, and like they do it like because they love it, not just like they want to make money. But like at the same time, like if they can't make it back, then it's like, well, what's really happening there? But I think that's a good point. Like there's so many like more individual things, like their salaries that are paid by the driving company, and then also like their individual sponsorships. So definitely like they'll be able to make it back, and it's like not that much of a big, crazy, huge deal for them. Okay, so F1 as an organization brought in over $2.5 billion in revenue. What are some ways you guys think they make their money, and how do you think how does that come in for them essentially?
Yeah, so F1 does have, I think F1 is like one of those sports that is more popular outside the US than in the US, because in the US you have other, I think, racings that are more popular, such as IndyCar and NASCAR, which is definitely more popular within the US. But F1 is, one of the most popular things to watch outside the US, and they have formed really big, contracts with a lot of large companies and also media companies outside of the US, such as like Sky Sports, which is a very big media company in the UK. And so they're earning a lot of money through signing these deals with these large media companies. But in each venue, typically, like, F1 is the top of the top racing league. Like, even though there are other racing leagues that are definitely, top, F1 is the top. And that's able to done because of its legacy, but also because of its money. So a lot of the tracks who want to host F1 races actually pay F1 to race on their tracks. So that's also how they earn their money. And if you like, recently we had the Las Vegas F1 Jeep Grand Prix, and that was actually kind of special because F1 owned all the rights to that race. So they tried to make as much money as possible through the Las Vegas GP. And then if you saw a lot of videos that blew up on the internet, you can see like each ticket price was going for thousands of dollars, even if you got like the worst seat ever, to watch the race. And like, F1 was trying to like prevent on like passerbys to watch the race, because they're trying to make as much money as possible, because this sport, it doesn't earn a lot of money. Like, it does earn a lot of money, but it also costs a lot of money. Especially with Las Vegas, they had to repave the roads. They had to set up everything, make sure the safeties for the drivers and for the onlookers. Those things cost a lot of money. And even though they will earn a lot of money back, that money sometimes is not enough to cover the costs. And that's why like sometimes you can see like, oh, they're making like multi-million-dollar deals, but sometimes the F1 is just not being profitable because simply how the sport works. And the extreme dangers. Like, racing is one of the most, if not the most dangerous sports in the world. Like, so many people have lost their lives racing. So that's why safety is so important, but all safety comes with expensive costs, expensive gears. So that's why, like, even though F1 seems to be making a lot of money, they also have to pay a lot of money if things do go wrong, and to prevent things from going wrong.
Yeah, definitely agree that compared to like other sports, that F1 is a little bit less cost effective. And then when we look at like what's the pay and like what's like the expenses, like even though like F1 is making like a lot, we also have to consider like every team like is using so much like money to like build their team as like a whole. And then that obviously we talked about before, that 1 million entrance fee seems like a lot, even is matches some of the contracts for even some NFL players. And those are like big prices compared to like what we see in like, I guess, some more like normal conventional sport like football or maybe soccer even. Um, but definitely I could see also like sponsorships and like car manufacturers that are giving F1 a lot of revenue, because like obviously we see that F1 is a very rich sport. F1 is a sport with a lot of legacy. So obviously those like big companies or big want to get involved and want to have like a sponsorship to also like, it could like take their, with the popularity of F1, it could like take these like companies like, I guess, like potential like customer like base, so it could grow their customer base because of how popular and like how like long F1 has been like lasting. And then the last thing that F1 could use to like make money is like celebrity investors. And this is pretty much for the same reason as like what I said about sponsorships and car manufacturers. They want to build on the F1 legacy. They want to invest in that F1 legacy. And definitely this like legacy, long lasting legacy, and the and the state of the sport as it is being a rich sport is definitely attracting superstar celebrity investors, and some notable names include Ryan Reynolds and Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, but them bringing in like 2.57 billion, that's like a lot of money. But when you think about like how much like teams are especially spending as well to like basically build build their teams and then have everything they need. I think they also put like a budget cap on each team spending because their their performance basically dictates how much for each team how much they earn. And what used to happen is like the bigger teams that have more money would usually just like would perform better and they would shut out the smaller teams. So they put like a budget cap to level the playing field a little bit. And essentially like so much money is going into the sport that I feel like they're gonna keep raking in money like uh through these deals. I know they have a deal with ESPN right now for the exclusive streaming rights, and then yeah, like Jack mentioned, like the celebrities. It's just like I think F1's gonna continue growing in popularity as more and more people start to get introduced, whether that's like through celebrities or just starting to watch it. And yeah, I feel like they're gonna keep making like a lot more a lot more money.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so last point. Individual driver advertising contracts. So think like Charlotte Leclerc for like watch brands. If you look on his Instagram, they're always like there's a lot of different ads. And Armani campaigns, Lewis Hamilton for Tommy Hilfiger and Monster Energy. So share some of your thoughts on these massive, massive brand deals for the individual driver. Do you think that a more competitive driver in F1, so like someone who is better at driving, makes them more valuable, or is there kind of like a balance in marketability with competitiveness, but also like who their persona is?
Yeah, I think Charles Leclerc is actually a very good example because Charles Leclerc is one of the best drivers on the grid currently. And he races under one of the most popular, one of the most popular race teams, but also one of the most famous race teams in F1 because Ferrari and the entire legacy with racing and the cars. And it's like I think F1 has in each individual F1 driver kind of represents their country because you know like even though they're like still they have racing teams, whatnot, they have teammates, but they're most of the time racing for themselves and for their countries. Like for F1, there's a very large sense of nationalism that goes on behind each driver. Like whenever each driver wins a race, they play their national anthem at the podium. And since it's not like the NBA or the NFL or any other major sporting league within the US, like those people are American. They're from the same nationality most of the time. But in F1, quite literally every single driver on the grid has come from, different countries with exceptions like Britain, which have made like a lot of successful drivers in France, like like if you say you race in Italy or you race in Spain or you race in France, people turn up to support certain drivers, even though they might like another team because of their nationality. And that also comes with the individual brand deals because, a lot of these companies who are from the nationalities of F1, they're like, doesn't matter how good they race that season. They will still sponsor the driver because they represent the country in F1. And, like Sergio Perez is like one of the most popular Mexican figures in Mexico. And like his even though his dad owns this really big company has done very shady things, like everyone views Sergio Perez differently because they represent Mexicans in F1, which is quite literally only him. And Charles Leclerc, he is like kind of like I think he lives in Monaco and he comes from like a variety of different backgrounds, but he still kind of represents like that symbol of wealth, a symbol, of status. So that's why a lot of these big sponsorship deals with luxury watch brands like Richard Mille, they come and sponsor him because he has that aura of, of luxury and kind of like that. And so that kind of like just goes down to, how good that driver's been popular wise. I don't think it really matters how good they race because I know like a lot of good F1 drivers who don't really get a lot of sponsorship because they're kind of overshadowed by a more popular figure from the same nationality, or like as I said, their nationality. If you're the only person from the country that's racing, all that countries companies would align with you. Like Yuki Tsunoda, the Japanese driver, a lot of support from Japanese companies. And so like their nationality also plays a very big role in achieving these sponsorship goals.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that before. That was really interesting that you mentioned like nationality has a really big role, and in that case, like I definitely think that it really, I think I think for some racers it could be like the maybe the best, and they can based on racers' ability, they can attract more like luxurious companies to come in. But I think it really depends on like the company and where they're from. That it also like that's like the main factor in what the driver like advertising contracts are really like based off of. Like if like a company is more popular, has more legacy, it is more likely for customers to maybe see like a driver like maybe like in their like clothes or something for like the clothing brand, for example, like Armani. Like we could see like a racer wearing like Armani clothes just like a model, and like a lot of people may be going into Armani stores and seeing that. And like I'm not exactly sure like what like nation like Armani is like a sponsor of, but I think whatever nation that is, I think Armani is like sponsoring the driver from there. And we obviously see that these big luxurious companies are we saw that always mentioned this in this like episode that F1 is a very like rich people like, sport, and we definitely see that like but the more like luxurious like companies are like able to like sponsor them, and often the more luxurious companies are often the more popular companies. So I definitely think that the company that sponsors the driver is a major factor, and obviously the reason why the company is sponsoring that driver could go down to many different like factors such as like nationality with like what Ivan mentioned. So I think even though some companies uh are sponsoring racers because of their ability, we see I think moreover that it's I think a bigger influence is the company that they're being sponsored by.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's like a threshold where like you have to be good enough, but like once you are at that level, there's more factors that play into it based on like whether companies want to sponsor the largest companies want to sponsor you or not. Because the people that these luxury brands choose to sponsor, they're essentially a face of the brand as well. And you want that face to be popular. I think the most popular like athletes aren't necessarily the best athletes. So I think there's a lot of factors that play into that. And yeah, so yeah, I don't think that you necessarily have to be like the very best in the sport of F1. But obviously, if you are, you probably have a really good deal yourself. But as long as you have like if you are like the only member like of a country that you're the only person in F1 representing a country, then you're gonna get a sponsorship. I think we've seen that with like other sports as well with the NBA. I remember like Zaza Pachulia, he got like top four like in all-star voting because he's from the country of Georgia or something like that, and all the fans started voting, and they had to make a rule to kind of block outside fan voting as part of it, so he didn't get the All-Star. But my point is like you don't necessarily have to be the best at something. You just have to have the fan base or like the people that are willing to watch you, that are willing to support you. That's how you get that lucrative deal.
Yes, definitely. I agree. So thank you guys so much for tuning in with us on this episode. Make sure to check out part 2 of this series as well.